Hi, I'm Marlon Peterson, Director of Community Relations for the Fortune Society, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal justice system from various perspectives, including from those most impacted by the criminal justice system. We discuss critical questions and how the current system works, its intersection with social justice, and highlighting the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, the viewer, to spread the word about Both Sides of the Bars and share your comments with us on Twitter at the Fortune Society. This month is actually Lesbian, Gay, and Transgender Pride Month. In a statement by President Obama, it reads that in many places around the globe, LGBT people face persecution, arrest, or even state-sponsored execution. This is unacceptable. The United States calls on every nation to join us in defending the universal rights of our LGBT brothers and sisters. Today on our show today, we have Grace DeChavera.
Yes.
I said it right. As well as Alicia Williams. Now, Alicia, you're a staff attorney with the Sylvia Law Project and a director of SLRP, Prisoner Justice Services, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And Grace, you've worked with the Sylvia Law Project, Audre Lorde Project. You're a staunch advocate and writer. We know this. I want to start with you, Alicia, first. In your bio, you said you're a snarky, queer, snarky radical queer. Tell us a little bit about
that. I use my sarcasm and dry sense of humor to kind of help get me through some of the rough prison work that I do. I think that's what I was referring to when I wrote snarky in my bio.
Thanks for that. It's good to have that sense of humor as well as in dealing with these critical issues. Now, how do you feel about this? So, as I mentioned at the outset, that this month is Pride Month as established by the president, and in him speaking about, defending the universal rights of LGBT brothers and sisters. In your experiences, particularly, Grace, in the work you've done at the Sylvia Law Project, do you feel as if there is enough, there's enough work, there's enough education, there's enough information about folks who are of the queer community within the criminal justice system?
I feel that there's still a lot of work to be done, especially as we see Pride Month and LGBT issues being pushed into this mainstream capitalist sort of movement. It's leaving out a lot of trans people, people who are in prison, low-income people. So there's definitely a lot of political education that needs to happen within the LGBT community and outside of it.
Grace, and I know at the outset you were speaking about, I know particularly that there's much more competence, at least cultural competence, which is a loaded term, around folks who are gay, lesbian within the criminal justice system, but particularly around those who are transgender. I know you've spoken about there is just not enough education about it within the criminal justice system, particularly somebody who has spent time within the criminal justice system. To be relevant and to give you a really clear answer to what you're saying, I believe it's about training. I can't say that enough. I can get away from the personal issues that maybe a staff person or maybe even the administration may have about transgender individuals that are in the system. However, that's not always how it affects someone like me. When you come into the system, you have to do what everyone else has to do. But then there's your appearance. There's the appearance that you may have breasts, you may be masculine if you're a woman, biological woman, that is. If you're a male, if you're a transgender and you have male genitals, but you have also breasts and you have features that are female, it can become very traumatic for not only me, but for the system, because they have not really addressed this issue. They've addressed it with fear, documented fear. Let's separate it. Let's segregate it. Let's put it away from the general population, and then it affects medical care and any other type of relevant need that the inmate may need who may be transgender. I'm big about making intersections, and I think, as you mentioned, people being separated or segregated, probably in isolation. In the article that you wrote on the Sylvia Law Project, on their website at least, you mentioned about pretty much corrections officials don't know what to do. They don't. So, speak about that a little bit. I can just give a brief instance of what happened to me. I remember when you're getting assessed and coming into the system, and you have to
undressed. That's just a security thing. But then you're standing there with maybe 40, 50 other inmates and staff and officers, and you are being stripped of your clothes, and you're sitting there. All these other guys, they have bodies as a man, and here it is, you have breasts, you may have long hair, you may have very soft features, and it just turns into a circus, and it creates a problem that does not have to be. No one's saying give special need to this, but treat it as something that doesn't become a problem for your staff. I'm more concerned about the staff because in my time in corrections, I didn't have, when the truth be told, a lot of times it's not the convict or so much the criminal who's going to have a problem with a transgender person. It's usually the staff because they're not trained, so they're going by off-the-cuff feelings or some cultural belief or, goodness sake, probably religious, but you can't prove it. So they use documentation. Well, this is a security problem. It's always security, and then that allows them to separate. And you don't get the needs that you may need. You can't get education in a cell, you know. You can't get the correct or relevant or even adequate medical care that you may need being segregated.
You know, prison is not good for anything.
Not for anyone. For anyone.
I'm kind of curious, as an attorney, what sort of policies do you think are in place or enact or should be changed in terms of being able to get administrators within the correctional system more aware and much more competent around the issue of folks who are trans?
Yeah, I want to touch on some of the stuff that Grace was mentioning, like some of the issues, so that we can talk about the policies to address the problems that we're seeing. In 2007, SRLP released a report called "It's War in Here: The Treatment of Transgender Women in New York State Men's Prisons." And that really outlines a lot of the problems that our community members are reporting to us. Even though it's 7 years old, we're still seeing some of the same issues as far as people needing access to a private shower because they're being verbally harassed or physically harassed by other people who are incarcerated or by staff. People who are not being allowed access to health care, and that could be trans health care like hormones, or it could be basic, I have a migraine, but when I go to sick call to talk to the nurse, she's transphobic, doesn't like my presentation, and doesn't want to see me at all. So we're talking about people having a lack of access to basic health care, and people, like Grace was saying, who, because of the administration's fear, they are segregating a lot of our trans community members, and when they're placed in segregation, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, they don't have access to programs, so that doesn't look good for the parole board, so they end up having longer stints in prison. And there's like rampant sexual assaults generally in prison, but obviously we would say more so disproportionately for trans people who are incarcerated. So when we start talking about policies to address those issues, we talk about policies that will allow access to health care, to trans health care, access to a therapist, to hormones. And you know, this sort of treatment is backed up by the American Psychological Association, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. So we want policies that will allow people access to health care. We also want policies that will make sure that people aren't isolated or housed solely based on their genital status. Or because the administration views them as an LGBT community member, they shouldn't be automatically isolated. That person should be able to express a preference for general population or isolation. There's been discussion of LGBT housing, whether that would be good or bad. There are a lot of different policies that we could push for, but we definitely want to do it with community support to address all of those issues that I was talking about before.
When you mentioned LGBTQ housing, what do you think about that? Is that a good idea? Is that the way to go?
You know, for New York City, they had a system where there was homosexual housing, and I believe because you're a detainee when you're on Rikers Island, you're not sentenced yet, and what would happen is that you would have my peers who would probably come in, and they were only in the system for 2 or 3 days, and they would put them in general population, and something horrific would happen to them. And in the 80s, I believe, it was created for homosexual housing. However, when the laws changed, this was a real trick of the paperwork here. When the laws changed with the hate crime law, they were allowed to use that or capitalize on that New York City corrections and take away the homosexual housing and put you in population, but if you were assaulted, they enacted that law on you. So it was, so guys had another way, and I have to say this because maybe corrections don't know what the new way, what's going on. When you come into a house now, they won't attack you. What they would do is that the guys would pay you to ask to leave their house.
The guy you're talking about, the
The
incarcerated
other
folks?
inmates.
All right.
The other inmates will come to you and they would say, listen, we are uncomfortable with you because of who you're representing or what you represent or how you look, but we're not going to put our hands on you because we're trying to go home, but we don't want you here. And you're tired, you're hungry, you don't have any soap, you don't have, you know, any of the accommodations you need to just survive until you get to your arraignment or your next court date. Who's going to say no? So you take that money. So that is the new way of how the inmate deals with you. With the officer, he will create something like saying that this person's in my house is causing a disturbance just for just being there. So it's
And that can get on your record then?
and then
All right.
now you're a problem and you're just a detainee. Far as state-wise, I believe that wouldn't be helpful because I don't see programming, and you would be right back at what it is right now. It would just be another legal form of segregating you. I believe that maybe you can have housings that could be LGBT, but you get the same, you connect or communicate with the rest of the population for programs, but your housing would be different. I can see them doing something like that, but to segregate you completely, that would just be another form of them doing what they're doing already.
And there's also like more forms of trauma. I know you've written about that as well, where, you know, prison for anyone is a traumatizing
Yes.
experience, but then once you're segregated into these other isolated spaces, for whatever reasons, is even heightening the amount of trauma that people have to deal with when they're in prison. Interesting enough, you know, bringing a racial sort of justice code perspective into this, you know, recent statistics shows that 47% of black trans people have been involved with the criminal justice system. Do you see that? I mean, like, why is that? Is there some sort of, once again, you know, black folks are unfortunately, you know, disproportionately within the criminal justice system. So why does this also translate to also the black folks who are trans as well? Any thoughts about that?
I mean, we talk about often in our work the different intersections of things like classism, ableism, racism, transphobia. All of that stuff really plays into each other. When you look at statistics, like I believe the trans people experience unemployment at 2 times the rate of the national average, but when you're looking at trans people of color, it's 4 times the rate of the national average. It's because you can't shed any of those layers of you. If you would face racism on a day-to-day basis and then you're trans, like you're going to face transphobia and racism, and if you're low income, you're going to face some sort of classism. Like all those things play together, and it's just one layer on top of the next. It's what we refer to as structural discrimination. It's just like there are layers to it. It's not just that there might be one racist person or one transphobic person that's going to put you down. It's really a system of inequality that is held up in society that we need to challenge.
So right, we're talking about pretty much a microcosm of society.
Oh,
pretty
yes.
much that we still exhibited within prisons, but it's just also translated to what's happening out here in terms of how folks discriminate against folks who, and also over police probably, because there are even statistics that speak about how within New York City, folks who have been stopped and frisked, particularly the folks who are trans, have been disproportionately stopped and frisked during the era of the past administration. So it's an interesting sort of connection between obviously the racial justice perspective and just general inequality. I know today you were speaking about you went to a training with the Board of Corrections, the Trans 101 training. Could you speak a little bit about that, please, Alicia?
Well, it's something that SRLP does. You know, we don't rely solely on legal services, like Grace was saying. It's also about training and cultural competency and getting out and doing the work of public education. So we rely heavily on doing transgender 101 trainings for different service providers and employers, different settings where our community members are going to encounter agencies, bodies that need to be trained on transgender issues. So I did one for the Board of Corrections today. They work with the Department of Corrections doing reports.
New York?
Yes, in New York. New York City jail system, to see if the New York City jail system is meeting minimum standards. So they were definitely a group that we wanted to reach out to and see if they wanted a training, because they deal a lot with our community members, especially the people who are writing to me. So that was just one of many trainings that we do.
Any thoughts about the reception of the training? Any feedback?
Oh, I think the reception was really well. It was, I don't know if it was a mandatory training, but it was one of the friendliest crowds. Like, it was very interactive, and people are interested in being able to work with trans people who are incarcerated that they're going to be dealing with, interacting with on a daily basis, that they already do. They had a lot of information for me. It was definitely a give and take for information. It's different than a mandatory training that we might do for an employer who maybe has a trans person on the job who's transitioning, and that person's not being treated well, so then we're called in to do a mandatory HR or equal employment opportunity training, and people are disgruntled and don't want to be there. That's a harder crowd to work with, but we work with them too.
Language. Within, those of us who do work within the criminal justice system, we're really big about the language that we use in humanizing folks, so we try to stay away from words like inmate, and we use incarcerated, formerly incarcerated. I know, speaking with you, even before me, you had to correct me when I said, I work as an ally with folks or within the queer community. You corrected me and saying I would prefer folks to use the term in solidarity. Can you explain a little about that?
Through the work that I've been so fortunate to do, you come across people who really believe that they're an ally, but when you explain to them, in your opinion, what an ally means, an ally will speak up for you when you're not there. I think it's politically correct to say the most inclusive things regardless what your agenda is. I don't think anybody at this time in a forum like this or any forum and say something that's anti-LGBT, but if you are at a forum and they're talking about exclusion of us and you say nothing, you are not our ally. You stand up for us at every moment and every time you need to, because the message that says is that you're a convenient ally. Who needs that? We don't need a convenient ally. We need someone who's in solidarity with freedom, with equality for everybody, not for when it's good or it's the month of June when all of a sudden you want to say that you are in favor of LGBT concerns and equality, but here comes August and we look at the newspaper and some celebrity or some human being does something or says something that is horrific to someone in our community, and you do nothing and you say nothing, or you say some passive thing, oh, that's not right, or that's not an ally. That's just someone who just has feelings at the moment, and it's maybe a relevant thing or nice thing to say, but they're not an ally.
If you could speak to criminal justice advocates right now, because I think that's something like folks like us need to hear, folks who are in the criminal justice who consider ourselves, may say we're allies, or in some places even say we're in solidarity. What would be your message to the folks like us? Because I think that when it comes to this sort of training, this sort of language I mentioned, I think that we need to get that message.
Not only do you need to get the message, you don't only not need to say it when it's forums of this. It has to be when you're talking about theater, when you're talking about building communities, when you're talking about stop and frisk, when you're whatever's on your agendas, include us, because that says that you speak for everyone. But when you only discuss people of what's on that agenda, young black people, and you leave out LGBT people, you leave out Caucasian people, you leave out people who have, if you go into a classism situation, leave no one out. When you leave someone out, it sends a message that you're convenient again. It's all about convenience.
So like being able to use your privilege.
Yes.
You can use your privilege anytime.
Shock some people. And I mean, this is what it's going to take. Equality is not going to come, and I don't think anybody believes that equality is going to come by someone saying something nice. People are going to have to feel this. They're going to have to be some people losing some jobs because they want to be in solidarity. Someone's going to have to stand up for us, because we don't need you just in June. We don't. We need you year-round. We don't need you when it's a march for stop and frisk or something that's horrible that's going on in our city or our state or the world, and then all of a sudden you want to come get us. No, come get us for everything. When you're talking about theater, when you're talking about rent controls, when you're talking about health care, when you're talking about everything, include us. That makes us in solidarity, not just how we're being treated in getting on the bus or getting arrested, okay?
And speaking about solidarity, one of the forums now that has given some sort of publicity to the issue of trans folks is a new Netflix television show, Orange is the New Black,
Okay.
with Laverne Cox, must I be correct? Who's a trans woman in real life and plays a transgender trans woman on the show as well. How do you feel about that show? Do you feel that, as your experience as a person who spends time inside of jails and prisons, do you think that that show gives a proper representation of the experience of
Not
folks?
in New York, it wouldn't. Because first of all, New York would never put Laverne's character in a woman's prison. Just like they wouldn't put a trans man in a men's prison. I think that that show is relevant. I think that the content and the dialogue there is relevant. Realistically, come on, no. I love the work that they're doing because it causes discussion. And when discussion starts, things can happen, and hopefully they will, positively.
Now going back to policy, I'm within the policy realm, and I know you're within the policy realm as well. What do you foresee? Like, if you could sort of like have some like short-term intermediate goals for some of policy within, let's say, New York City or New York State. What are some of those like low-hanging fruit that we can sort of stretch for to make folks the system much more competent around issues of trans folks?
I don't think that the Prison Rape Elimination Act is as comprehensive as it could be, but it's something that's there. It's something that the city and the state have said that they're going to comply with. So as advocates, I think it's on us to push them to comply, to ask for transparency and ask about policies that the Department of Corrections are allegedly going to be creating to become more compliant with PREA. Like, we need to hear about that stuff. Like, what are y'all doing? Don't exclude community members, like people who are currently incarcerated, people who are formerly incarcerated, advocates like people at SRLP and Streetwise and Safe, like organizations who are doing this work. We should be involved in that conversation so that when policies are crafted, we can actually give them the reality. Like, this is what people are experiencing. How are you going to tailor the policy to address these issues? And it's also about decriminalization and making sure we keep our community members out of prison, not just waiting until they're in jail and in prison to do something and create a policy that's not going to actually make prison safe or effective.
Right, it's still just to bring up that stat again, about 47% of Black trans folks have been involved with the criminal justice system. That stands out to me so much as a stark reality, as a horrid sort of reality that folks, once again, of color, people of color, are involved with the criminal justice system disproportionately. That being said, though, how do you feel, though, about, do you feel, as I read that comment about Obama and, about Pride Month and, around the world we need to be much more aware of these human rights issues. Do you think at all that, how much work do you think needs to be done here in New York or in America in itself? Either one? I know you got a lot to say.
I have to big up my church. I go to Rivers at Rehoboth, Pastor Vanessa M. Brown, and we have a Reverend Tolman there, and he brings a lot of worldly issues to our church. And he goes to Nigeria, and he goes to Uganda and China, and it's some horrific things going on in those countries. I believe that America, being who we are and what we stand for somewhat, we're allowing a discussion to happen where culturally they would shut it down. With a president and administration and the aura that's being sent around the world in various places, when you have a pope who is listening, not changing thought process to scripture, but allowing people to, wait a minute, calm down. People are dying now because of our teachings and the way we are interpreting scripture. I believe that our president and just the aura that's going on right now, not just in June, but yearly in the last, I would say, in the last 6 years, it's allowing a discussion in countries and in our country where we're able to have that discussion with our friends, our foes, our religious leaders, our policymakers, and it's progressive to have that. It's progressive to have that.
I feel like one of the things that we should focus on is not allowing for Obama's statement, whenever he made that statement, to pacify us or make us complacent or make us think that, oh yeah, we need to spread America's goodwill and all of our equality over to other countries, when the reality is there is not any equality in America. We need to make sure that we're focusing on that. We're listening to people who, again, are most impacted by these systems of inequality, and also challenging the way that our policies impact other countries. Like when we're talking about homophobia, transphobia, and things like that in other countries, that comes from somewhere. That comes from colonialism. That comes from things that are entrenched in American society that we still haven't fully addressed. So I don't think those statements are enough. There's definitely still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, definitely, and I love the fact that you all keep making these intersections. I'm big. There's a professor named Kimberly Crenshaw who does a lot of work around intersectionality. And I think it's important that when we speak about these issues of the criminal justice system, we always are able to make these connections, because we have to work on the system work and not sort of like individualize it. And I think you mentioned at the outset, like, you may become less relevant, but the system we still need to do, as an individual, less relevant, but the system work still needs to be done. It needs to be taken care of. It needs to be pushed. And that's why, I wanted to start with the Obama, his inauguration of Pride Month, to sort of see, like, is the system working? Not sort of just like one person working. And also with the Laverne Cox stuff on Netflix on Orange is the New Black. So I know before we're about to close out, but I know you were speaking about what's this lady's name? Talk show host.
Oh, Wendy Williams.
Wendy Williams and Laverne Cox on the show. You had a little issue with that.
Well, no, not necessarily about an issue. She has a history of saying very transphobic statements. I don't know if it's done out of condition or to get ratings. I just enjoyed how the interview that she had with Laverne, and how Laverne looked back and talked about whose shoulders she's standing on, and how don't just big her up, that there are a lot of people doing the work that she's doing. And Wendy almost wanted to talk about her surgery and all that, and that was not appropriate. But I understand her situation. She's a talk show host. She wants to get the statement. She wants to get the dirt. And I just love Laverne for that.
On that note, we'd like to wrap up. If folks want to be able to get in touch with the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, how can they get in touch with you?
Email us at info@srlp.org. You can also check out our Prisoner Advisory Committee blog on our website at srlp.org, where Grace has written a couple of submissions, and we have people who are currently incarcerated who write and talk about their experiences. It's a great way for people to get familiar with the work that we are doing and the experiences of our community members who are incarcerated.
And you want to get to see the wonderful stuff that you're doing. You're a staunch advocate.
Oh, yes. I'm doing a lot of stuff. Well, one, I want to, if I can, I have my book coming out. I have a book coming out. It's pending, and I'm continuously working with Sylvia Rivera and Audre Lorde Project, and I'm working in theater now.
Thank you. Thank you both for our show. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you to our guests for coming to the show once again. Thank you to TV Land for joining us as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org, or on Facebook by typing in the Fortune Society. This is Marlon Peterson as we critically look at both sides of the bars.